Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now unfortunately I'm not doing too well today again. It kind of comes and goes day per day, but there are a few things that I want to talk about, and there are a few videos that I do want to make before I go and pass out on a couch. And the one that is currently probably the more important one is about Guillotine. There has been a huge amount of discussions on forums, dozens of threads, and not a single proper answer from Kabam. You see, I don't think this buff should be tolerated. I genuinely don't. And let me explain why. First off, we're going to start with the fact that Guillotine's buff was meant to be an overhaul. And it isn't. We have seen moderate buffs with much more significant changes. She still has every single core mechanic based on her souls, gaining bonuses because of it, bleed, stuff like that, as she did before. Only new thing that has really come is that pain link, which nobody asked for, which everybody hates, and the signature ability gives her access to Rapture, really. So this is a moderate buff. This is not an overhaul. If you take a look at Bishop or Ultron or plenty of other champions who did in fact receive flat out moderate buffs, this is how they look. Then you can take a look at champions who actually got overhauled. For better or worse, you could clearly see difference in them, how their abilities work, what they do, and you don't need to necessarily look at the heaviest, best versions of them like Magneto and Colossus and stuff like that. Look at even the failure ones, Deadpool Hell's Kitchen, for instance. You can see a meaningful, significant change in the ability kit of Deadpool Hell's Kitchen from before to now. Look at who else is a relatively underwhelming overhaul, or maybe not necessarily underwhelming, Miles Morales. Completely new set of mechanics. And now we have Guillotine. This is not overhaul. That's the first thing. Before even going into the quality of this buff or nerf or whatever side you want to debate, I want to make sure that I don't think this is an overhaul. I think this is the least effort anybody has ever put into an overhaul. And that shows in what the champion does. The champion is effectively, plus minus, the same champion as it was before, for all intents and purposes. We have had significantly more impactful value-only changes. Because at the grand scheme of things, her damage is there about the same. In some situations, it's better. In some situations, it's questionably worse. But then we have healing that's going nerfed to the ground about 4 times, and then we have other abilities that have kind of remained the same or maybe gotten slightly better. And then obviously we have the absence of her unique level 3. So the first thing that I want to point out here is that I don't agree that this is an overhaul to begin with. I think this is pathetic and lazy excuse of an overhaul. Then we can move on talking about what a buff is and whether we can call this a buff. Now, I'm not necessarily going to scream from top of my lungs that Guillotine has been nerfed to the ground and she's unplayable. But there are very valid arguments to both sides who prefer Guillotine the way she was before and who prefer this version of Guillotine. And the fact that that is a case immediately tells that the Guillotine buff has been a failure. If there is significant portion of player base saying that they prefer an old, outdated champion to whatever Kabam constitutes to a champion that has been overhauled in 2021, then overhaul has been a failure. Now, some people might say, oh, she has slightly more damage and, you know, she has access to unblockable. Yeah, it's fine and dandy. And some people say, I don't care about that. Her damage was good enough and fairly comparable to what it is now before the buff, and her region was the main thing I used to rank her up. I'm not necessarily going to make that argument here, but there is a legitimate argument as well for people demanding rank down tickets if they had this champion ranked up previously, because they might have ranked her up for her region or for her level 3, opposed to slightly better damage. So that is just yet another point in this entire case that I'm making. Number one, I don't see an overhaul. Number two, she's arguably worse. There are some who say she's better, but I think majority of the people think that she's worse now. So that's point number two. Point number three is that this is the community vote winner. This is something that clearly enough people were passionate that they actually voted for her, grinded arena, and made sure that she won against 8 other champions. And I'm not, again, saying that Guillotine should be absolutely OP and, you know, top of the game kind of champion. But there should be at least some respectful amount of improvement. Because as it stands right now, I use the word respectful on purpose. Because this entire situation just feels about as disrespectful as it can be. Whoever did this buff put in absolute minimum amount of effort into designing it. There is an absolute minimum amount of change to the character. In many situations, she's worse. Like, she used to have, for instance, armor on her base kit, and now she's super squishy without that armor. Why take that away? There are plenty of things like that about this champion. Why reduce her bleed chance? Why reduce the bleed potency? Anyways, so the third argument in this video is that it just feels utterly disrespectful. This buff would be poorly received and actively debated and complained about on forums should it be a regular every month kind of buff. Given the fact that this is the one buff vote that we did this year, and a lot of people are looking forward to this and work forward to it and campaign for this champion, for the result to be borderline nerf, or instead of saying the word nerf, I guess I'm going to use balance changed champion rather than buffed champion. It's not what anybody signed up for and expected. And argument number four. Argument number four is still the world famous post on Kabam forums about reducing the champion buff Cadence in order to improve the quality of the champion buffs. Well, guess what? They haven't. They really haven't. Few days after the post goes live, we get Gamora buff, which is again one of the worst buffs ever. And then the month after, we get an overhaul that doesn't even look like an overhaul. That looks like a moderate update to the character at the best, but it looks like an update that doesn't even make the character better. It just makes it slightly different. I think it's up to us as players to ask Kabam to stick by what they said. Because that was the prerequisite of everybody being so accepting of that message. We are fine with you reducing the amount of champions you buff every month if that does indeed lead to us having better quality buffs. That is pretty much what was on the mind of every single player who read that message from Kabam a little over a month ago. And that has not been the case. So those are four, I believe, very reasonable arguments on why I believe what Kabam should do is leave Guillotine as is for now in the game, but re-update her before end of the year. Again, give her some extra abilities, make her actually buffed, make her somewhat different. Make it feel like an overhaul. In my mind, this situation is even significantly worse than it was with Hood, because at the very least, the Hood's changes were actual changes, and you could understand what Kabam is trying to do with Hood as a character. In here, we have absolutely no meaningful changes to the character at all, and we have several abilities that function significantly worse opposed to what they used to, without actually being given any meaningful new abilities. Anyways, so those have been my 4 arguments. Number 1, for an overhaul, this is not an overhaul. This is a moderate buff at best. We have seen moderate buffs with more changes. Number 2, think it is questionable whether the champion's actually better off or worse off. I personally think she's somewhat worse off, or at the very least, I would personally find more value in Guillotine the way she used to be in my account, because I might not necessarily use her daily, but at the very least she had something unique to offer. Now she doesn't. Nothing meaningful anyways. Number 3, the fact that this was a community choice. Right? Did I miss one? I think I missed one. But you guys got the point. It's just sad. Oh yeah, number 3, community choice. Number 4, the fact that Kabam reduced the amount of buffs to increase the quality, which we have not seen. We really have not seen increase on the quality of the buffs. So long story short, I think Kabam should re-buff Guillotine again by end of the year. Make an announcement, make a commitment that that is what they will do. Leave her as she is in the game and work on her again. And then by end of the year, have her as the 3rd buff on top of 2 other buffs. Don't let her take a slot off another champion. Make her be the 3rd buff on top of whatever champions they would buff in December, for instance. That is what I think should happen with Guillotine. Because it's just embarrassing. Like, if I would be working in Kabam and if I had anything to do with this particular buff, I just feel embarrassed. If I'd be a community manager who had to write that you are reducing the amount of buffs in order to improve quality, I'd be embarrassed. You'd be somebody who said, okay, this is good enough of a work, I'd be embarrassed. Let me know what you think, guys. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about